Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I'm back again today doing another video. Today is another continuation in the Rise and Fall series for all the NBA contenders that I've been looking at. Today's video focuses on the Brooklyn Nets from 2010 to 15. This could be summed up as the Deron Williams era, and I'll be again continuing to examine why this team rose to success, why it plateaued, then why it ultimately started falling apart. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. So just for reference, the way I'll be setting this up is in the top left, you'll typically see the regular season and playoff stats. So you'll see team record, what seed they were, if they made the playoffs. Below that, you'll see how they fared in the playoffs. Then below that, the team's regular season offense and defensive ratings. So obviously this first year, you'll see then below as well the regular season stats as far as games played, minutes played, field goal attempts and percentage, same with three pointers and free throws, then total rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, points. So you'll notice this first season can be summed up by the Deron Williams trade. So of course at first they had Devin Harris and uh, Derek Favors, and they traded those two at the trade deadline for Deron Williams, who did play 12 games for the team, but also struggled with injuries quite a bit, so he was limited to only 12 games. You'll see he was really bad efficiency wise when he played for the team, and he only scored 15 points a game, but he was getting 5 rebounds and 13 assists a game, so those are pretty eye popping. Also, Brook Lopez had a really solid season for the team, scoring 20 points a game. Same with Anthony Morrow. He had a pretty solid season. Travis Outlaw was starting for the team and more of a he's like what you'd call a 3 and D player if the D or if the three-pointer was very streaky and average. Um, and besides that, nobody really of note too much. Just kind of some random a bunch of white guys at the end of the bench between Vujacic, Humphreys, and Farmar. Um, but this season, actually, if you look at it, Chris Humphreys had himself a pretty good year, 53% from the field, averaging 10 and 10. But yeah, this team can basically be summed up as the transition year, where not much was expected because they had just traded for Deron Williams and he was injured the latter half of the year. 2011 to 12, there were more expectations this year, but again, the team actually failed to make the playoffs. They had brought in the likes of Deshaun Stevenson, hoping he would be a big addition, coming off of his run with the Dallas Mavericks. They signed him as a free agent, hoping he'd be a really good 3 and D player. They also brought in Gerald Green off of Flyers from the G League, hoping he would be good, and he was pretty good for the most part. Also, Mehmet Okur as a free agent at the tail end of his career. They brought him in for a little bit. So if you look at this team, they had traded, I believe, I don't remember who it was. It was the pick that was used to select Damian Lillard. They traded that at the deadline for Gerald Wallace, who came in and had an okay second half of the season for them. Again, he only played 16 games and battled injury, and this whole season can be summed up with injury issues as well. Deron Williams missed nearly 30 games with injury. Of course, you'll see his efficiency numbers were a little bit better. His scoring was a bit better, but still injuries were hampering him a bit. Um, Gerald Wallace, even after getting traded to the team, struggled with some injuries. Chris Humphreys, who actually turned in the best season of his career, averaging 14 points and 11 rebounds a game, missed 20 games due to injury. Brook Lopez, who you could argue is their second best player, missed essentially the entire season due to injury. Um, Anthony Morrow, who was starting for the team at the time, missed 20 games due to injury. And then same with Deshaun Stevenson and Gerald Green, two other guys who were playing substantial minutes, missing 50 games and 30 games respectively. And Deshaun Stevenson was a pretty big free agency miss in that, as you can see, he shot under 29% from the field on the season and under 29% from three as well. And he's pictured top right, and Gerald Wallace pictured bottom left. 2012 to 13 is the first season that this team really started to turn it around. They had a pretty good luck as far as injuries went. Brook Lopez was healthy. Deron Williams was healthy. They also at the time traded for Joe Johnson. This is a big note here that they traded for Joe Johnson, and they basically gave up, I believe it was Jordan Farmar, Johan Petro, and maybe it was Chris Humphreys as well, but I think that they had released Humphreys right away when they got him, but no, excuse me, they still had Humphreys on the roster as you can see here, but they gave up basically nothing for Joe Johnson, maybe like Deshaun Stevenson too. Uh, the Hawks basically just want to dump his salary. So the Nets got him for basically nothing. Um, but here you can see they had him, they had Williams, Lopez all healthy. Gerald Wallace relatively healthy, and then they had brought in some supporting pieces like Reggie Evans, Keith Bogans, C.J. Watson, and Andre Blatch. Some good supporting pieces. Blatch was instant offense off the bench. Reggie Evans was instant rebounding off the bench. You can see in less than 25 minutes a night, he got 11 rebounds. If you adjust that to playing per 36, per 36 minutes a night, that's him getting 16 and a half to 17 rebounds a game. So if he would have been playing starters numbers like Williams or Joe Johnson, he would have been getting 17 rebounds a night, which is outstanding. Um, and this is the only year that Brook Lopez made an All-Star appearance. Fun fact. I believe Joe Johnson was also an All-Star this year, if am remembering correctly. This team had a really good offense, eighth in the league. Defense was middle of the pack, but they, as you can see from the roster makeup, Lopez, Deron Williams, Joe Johnson, all very offensive oriented. Their only defensive guys were really Wallace and Reggie Evans. Um, Wallace also fell off quite a bit, as you can see here. On the left are regular season stats, and on the right are playoffs. But in the regular season, Wallace shot under 40% from the field, under 30% from three. His playoffs, he actually played decent, but um, the reason that this team lost in the playoffs is that they were playing a really good defensive team in Chicago, and basically Chicago's defense beat Brooklyn's offense. You had Joe Johnson play a little bit below what he should have been playing. His points were stifled a little bit. Deron Williams played fine. Never an efficiency darling, but it was a little bit lower in the playoffs. Same with Brook Lopez. And, this was a close series, 7 games, but Chicago just had a little bit more grit than this Brooklyn team. And I think Brooklyn came out of this saying to themselves, we need a little bit more depth. We essentially are a three-man offense because Gerald Wallace is now more of just a defensive player. So we needed to do something about that. So coming out of that, the next season, they made the big infamous trade, sending Chris Humphreys, Marshawn Brooks, um, Gerald Wallace to the Celtics, along with 3 draft picks for Garnett, Pierce, and Jason Terry. So now, as you can see, they were a much deeper team on paper, having Johnson, Williams, Brook Lopez, Paul Pierce, and Garnett as their starting lineup, with a pretty good bench of Sean Livingston, Marcus Thornton, Allen Anderson, Andre Blatch, Andre Karolinko, and Jason Terry. You'll see from the stats that their record was actually worse, and that can really be attributed to injuries. You'll have Deron Williams missing close to 20 games, Brook Lopez essentially missing close to the entire regular season. Um, you have Kevin Garnett missing close to 30 games. Um, Andre Karolinko, who was supposed to be like a sixth man to this team, he missed close to 40 games, and Jason Terry missed close to 50 games. So of your top, let's say 7 players, you had one basically miss the whole season in Lopez. You had one miss close to 30 games in Garnett. One miss close to 20 games in Williams. One miss close to 50 games in Terry, and then one miss close to half the season in Karolinko. So you had, out of all those top 7 guys, only Johnson and Pierce were consistently healthy throughout the season. Also, a big plight with this team was that Williams fell off a bit as far as his scoring, down to only 14 points a game. And, in a season where Brook Lopez missed most of the year, they expected a lot more out of Deron Williams offensively. Come the playoffs, this was a team that, again, they didn't have Brook Lopez, so they were relying a lot more on Paul Pierce than they had originally thought. Same with Garnett. They had pictured Garnett still being the Garnett of a season or two prior, where he was good for 16 points and 10 rebounds. And the truth was, this is the season that he fell off a cliff as far as being a good player. Basically, he just basically wasn't a good player anymore by this point, and they had expected him to still be All Star level, or at least what Pierce was giving him, which was usually between 13 to 15 points a night. Same with Jason Terry. They were still expecting some form of the championship Dallas Mavericks Jason Terry, and he didn't even really like play in the playoffs at all, and during the regular season he was very much a non-factor. So they had basically gone all in on a bunch of dudes who they were just about to get the last squeeze of juice out of, and two out of the three they could just completely whiffed on. And even Paul Pierce, the best one out of the three, was a free agent at the end of the season, and he bolted. And so let's get on to the last season, 14 to 15. But I guess first we should examine. They did make the second round. Actually, this is the only playoff series they won during this stretch, and they got pretty badly beat by Miami in the second round. But this season really was marred by injuries if you look at it, and then the complete falling off of a cliff of Jason Terry and Kevin Garnett. The next season, the last season in this series, they actually still made the playoffs, but they were a pretty bad playoff team, winning only 38 games. You had Joe Johnson healthy, you had Brook Lopez healthy, Deron Williams relatively healthy. They had brought in supporting pieces like Bojan Bogdanovic and Jarrett Jack, but then they traded Garnett mid-season for Thad Young, who actually provided pretty good play for them. So, despite losing Terry, Paul Pierce, and Garnett all about between 12 to 18 months after acquiring them, they did a pretty okay job of filling them in with supporting pieces in their replacement with Jarrett Jack, Bogdanovic, and Thad Young. But by this point, Deron Williams had fallen off a cliff as far as efficiency. Um, and Joe Johnson, I think at this point was like 33, 34. So his best days were definitely behind him as well, as you can see. And I believe it was very controversial because maybe it was this year, maybe it was the year before. It was the year before, never mind. But Joe Johnson made the All Star game and was considered one of the worst All Stars ever. But um, regardless, they made the playoffs. They got blown out by Atlanta in the first round. 2-4 makes it seem a lot closer than it was, because even though it was at 1.2-2, everybody knew that Atlanta was winning this thing. It's kind of like when Cleveland beat Toronto 4-2 in the Eastern Finals in 2016. Everybody knew that Cleveland was winning that. Same here. Joe Johnson played terrible in the playoffs, 36% from the field. Deron Williams, 39% from the field, also played terrible. Same with Bojan Bogdanovic, 39% from the field. Newsflash, if you're a wing and you're shooting below 45% from the field, you're pretty dang inefficient. So, three of their best scorers being really inefficient. And yeah, after the season, they really blew it up. Deron Williams left in free agency, I believe. Joe Johnson left in free agency, or Joe Johnson was traded mid-season the next year. Um, Bogdanovic left in free agency, I believe, yeah, or was traded. I can't remember, but this was basically the season before they started the whole rebuild and um, their own version of the process. So they failed spectacularly. They were aspiring to be an NBA title team with this roster and core, but they really fell short. If you want to sum up why this team ended up falling short of their title aspirations, it really comes down to, I think, two to three things depending on how you look at it. Number one, um, Deron Williams basically was just not the player they expected him to be. In none of these seasons did Deron Williams play how they had hoped for him to play, except for maybe you'd say 2000 this season, 2012 to 13. He played pretty well, but even so, his efficiency was pretty low for what they had expected as far as field goal percentage. Um, the other seasons, he either was inefficient or uh, his injuries really held him back. Um, Number two, you'd say just overall team injuries. During this 5 year stretch of contending, you had Brook Lopez basically missed two entire seasons during this stretch of time. You had the year prior to this final one, like 5 of their 7 main guys miss substantial amounts of time. Um, yeah, this is a team that really never had an entire core healthy, except for 2012 to 13, and even then, they had Gerald Wallace, who was arguably like their third or fourth best player, missing close to 15 games, which isn't a ton, but that's the healthiest they got was that season. And then, lastly, I'm going to attribute the plights of this team to basically going all in on a team that was very old, except for basically Brooke Lopez and Deron Williams. They had of that this season that we're looking at right here, 13 to 14. Your main pieces you were counting on outside of those two were like a 33-year-old Joe Johnson, 36 and 37-year-old Pearson Garnett, 35-year-old or 34-year-old Karolinko, like 34, 35-year-old Jason Terry. That's a really old roster. And, you know, when you have those kind of guys and that age on a team, you're lucky if you get a healthy season out of 3 of those 5. But they got a healthy season really out of 2 of them. So um, they were counting on all of them being healthy and being big contributors, and they just shouldn't have bet so hard on a bunch of old dudes being as good as they were when they were 27, which is what they were banking on. So yeah, there you have it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this kind of thing, check out the other videos in the series, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.